Hello, friends. Al Iverson here. It's time for another one of your email authentication and deliverability questions answered. This time around, the question I'm going to answer is, what does P2 sender compliance mean? Now, this harkens back to a topic that's been top of mind for everybody recently, and that is the updated Microsoft 2025 email compliance requirements, which we have covered extensively, both in Ask Al videos and on our blog with our compliance guide and how this all ties into Maggie, the convergence of best practices across all the top inbox providers. And to recap there, if you're wondering at a high level, what are the Microsoft requirements if you didn't see all of prior coverage, this is newly announced requirements from Microsoft where they say that bulk senders sending more than 5,000 messages a day have to comply with the new set of requirements from Monday, May 5th onward. There's links to the actual announcement, in fact, from Microsoft right there, and a link to our analysis and a link to our compliance guide where we break it all down on how best to comply with everything across those top four mailbox providers. In a nutshell, there, right, the requirements are, again, for bulk senders sending 5,000 plus messages per day. One of the primary focuses here that we like to touch on because it certainly impacts what we do here at ValidMail is SPF, DKIM, and DMARC are required. Though right now, Microsoft, like with Yahoo and Google, say that a policy of P equals none is okay, keeping in mind that that doesn't really protect your domain against phishing and spoofing. And of course, some form of alignment is required too. Alignment being where an authentication indicator matches the visible from address. In other words, like the SPF domain matches the from domain, the DKIM header domain matches the visible from domain. That's alignment. So specifically here, let's talk about one of the things that was called out, quoted, I'm quoting here explicitly from the Microsoft requirements, this specific P2 sender address compliance requirement. It says compliant P2 primary sender addresses ensure that the from or reply to address is valid, reflects the true sending domain, and that it can receive replies. Now, to better understand what that is and how to comply with it, first let me explain what is a P1 or P2 sender address. And these are Microsoftisms. This is Microsoft terminology for, in the case of P1, the envelope sender or return path address, where you check SPF, Sender Policy Framework. For P2, this is the visible from address, the thing that you're looking for alignment when you're checking DMARC. So that's P1 and P2. If you want to compare them to the RFCs, the terminology you might have heard elsewhere if you're an email nerd, the P1 address maps to the RFC 5321 from, and P2 maps to the RFC 5322 from. Again, that's P1 being sort of the path of the message that you check via SPF, where bounces go if you're an email service provider platform. And P2 is that visible address, that visible sender address, what shows up in the from address visible to the person actually viewing the email message in their email client. So, compliant sender address. Now, a little bit of this is us trying to fill in the blanks based on what we think or know best practices typically are. The good thing is, though, is we do have a little bit of guidance from Microsoft. First, we have that first bit that I talked about there. What do they actually say in the actual meat, in the body of the requirements? In the comments below the requirements post from Microsoft, a person from Microsoft actually added some clarification. What does it mean to have a P2 compliant address or a compliant P2 sender address? So this is what they say. This is regarding RFC compliance. We have observed that many senders are using non-RFC P2 sender addresses either unknowingly or for questionable reasons. Recent developments on this topic are discussed in our new approach to non-RFC compliant emails blog. In the future, we may start blocking this email. So as a general recommendation, we encourage all senders to ensure that their sender addresses comply with RFC standards. There's a link to that non-RFC compliant emails blog. Put that on the screen there as well. So what does that mean to be RFC compliant? Now, if you don't know the terminology, RFC is request for comments, and it is the mechanism by which internet standards are created and documented. So they're referring to making sure that the email configuration for your domain is in line with internet standards. And so here at a high level, if you go on for days here, it can get kind of deep, but need to start here, making sure that your domain exists, that it can receive email, can receive replies to email messages, the addresses that you set up at that domain, specifically the address you use in your sends that are going to Microsoft addresses, making sure that your server IPs have proper forward and reverse DNS. Any server on the internet is going to have an IP address associated with it. The mapping between an IP address and a domain name or a host name, that's the mapping between forward and reverse DNS. Reverse is when you look up an IP and you find the domain name. It's also called a pointer record. The forward DNS or a record is when you look up the name and you find the IP address. These are all standard things that people who set up email servers know. So if you're doing things right, if you're setting up servers properly to make sure that everything involved has DNS in all the proper ways for servers that you're setting up, should be good there. Then also for domains that send and receive email, got to have an A record, got to have an MX record. There's some ambiguity there. Some people will say A or MX is good enough. Technically true per the spec. I know in my personal experience that if you don't have both of those, occasionally you will have odd deliverability issues because of the lack of an A record when perhaps having an MX record is in theory good enough. So if you want my opinion, have both an A record and MX record, and then also have an SPF record, sender policy framework, right? It doesn't mean that you necessarily have all of the services that you set up in the SPF record for that top level domain. How you configure that can vary based on how the sending services are configured, but it is a best practice to make sure that you have SPF in place so that any use of that domain, not in a visible from address, but in the return path, and that P1 address is mapped out properly so that SPF authentication lookups pass properly. And it's just on top of that, right? In addition to configuring SPF, make sure you're configuring DKIM and DMARC as well. Can receive replies. What does that mean? This doesn't necessarily prohibit using a no reply address, though I still don't think they're a good idea for other reasons. Ultimately, you want to make sure that email to addresses that you're sending from are accepted. If somebody can reply back, that email should get accepted and go somewhere. Microsoft is not explicitly saying that you have to have somebody reply to that reply. I don't know how they would vet that, even if they did, but if at all possible, make sure emails are going somewhere useful, being routed to somewhere where they can be responded to as appropriate. You don't want to get in a situation later where Microsoft or some other mailbox provider comes up with a way to monitor for this type of compliance, and then you're reaching out to them for help. You've got a deliverability problem. And if they know that your address is not compliant, that your sender address can't receive replies, they're less likely to give you assistance. So the best thing you can do there, set yourself up for future success, is to make sure that your email addresses are replyable, the replies go somewhere, that they're not bouncing, and they're not discarded. Another question that I get here is a subdomain okay? Does the sender address have to be at that top level or apex level for a domain? And a subdomain is definitely okay there. It's totally fine to send at, in my example here, news@email.valamail.com. Does not have to be news@valamail.com. If you send with the top level of the domain, that's fine. But the subdomain, if that's the way you've got things configured, that's fine too. That's very common for email service providers. Regardless of what you do, make sure that all the proper things are set up in DNS for that domain level or subdomain level, regardless of which way you go. Want to learn more on this? Here are links to our compliance guide there, our analysis, and the direct link to getting it straight from the horse's mouth, directly from Microsoft to their announcement and their FAQ. And definitely scroll down to the bottom of the announcement, let the comments load, and you'll see some kind folks from Microsoft taking some time to answer some questions there. I think you'll find that useful to check that out. And if you need more help from us, start with our sender requirements guide, where my colleague Alyssa has mapped out everything you need to know about compliance with all 4 of the top mailbox providers, bulk sender requirements. That's what we call Maggie, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and Yahoo. There's a link to that there. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop me an email at al.iverson@valamail.com. And that's everything I had for you today. I hope you found this interesting, and looking forward to catching you in the next one. Thanks.